You know how I found this comic that's on the screen right now? I found this comic from a Japanese Twitter. Japanese Twitter. Not English Twitter. English Twitter. Yeah, the British. No, but American Twitter or American political. It was the Japanese. And the message that was attached to it, I thought was very interesting. Let's read this message to start this segment before we get into the absolute dumpster fire that is American foreign policy right now. Let me read you what the Japanese man said in attaching to this post, this image. From Zelensky's perspective, having to respond in English is pretty nerve-wracking. See, this is a shot from Zelensky's perspective, where you can see Trump, you can see Vance to his right, you can see Marco Rubio, and you can even see there's little bags under Marco Rubio's eyes in this depiction. So even the artist of this could see the soullessness by which Marco Rubio has abandoned everything he believes in. You can actually see the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States on the right-hand side here, putting her head in her hands in shame. And it's supposed to, this is a comment from the Japanese person on two things. Number one, of course, the nerve-wracking nature of having a guy like drill you about, why aren't you wearing a suit, and having all of these people, all these cameras, this big tag team all surrounding you. And you're having to engage back and forth with the president, but also translate what he's saying into English, into Ukrainian in your head, then translating that back at, then translating what you want to say in Ukrainian to English and saying it back. What the post seemed to get at is an element that I haven't seen talked about a lot in the story, and that's how difficult is it for you to not only engage in this type of high-level diplomacy, but also do it when English is not your first language, and you've got two people yelling at you as well as the press. And the person that's talking to you is the type of person that's not going to be like, here's what I have to say and let me wait patiently, and then my friend will speak and then we'll wait. No, they're going to speak over you. And I thought about this as it was happening, but it wasn't something I wanted to get into the trenches over because I thought there was more important topics to talk about. And I think we've covered the other elements of how unfair the meeting was at length in other topics and other subjects, other videos. So I just wanted to quickly say, it is really unfair to yell over a man who has to translate everything from his own language into English and then translate what you're saying in his head and then translate what he wants to say back to you. And that's his own process. And he doesn't have like a person in there to translator to help him. And even if he had a translator in there to help him, like Trump was going so fast and he was yelling over everything, the translator couldn't have helped him. And so he has to stand up for his country during a 2v1 when journalists are asking him stupid questions about like why isn't he wearing a suit when he's answered that a million times before? Because guess what? That journalist isn't just a journalist. It also happens to be the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congressperson who said that the Ukrainians are sacrificing babies and taking their organs to fund the war effort. Real statement she said on a nationally televised news program as a sitting congressman from the state of Georgia. Sure, that is the type of stuff the Georgians want spoken about on the big stage. Anyway, I wanted to retouch this for just a moment because just layering on how cruel our country has been to the Ukrainians as of late, and that's what I'm going to call it, cruel, I think is important because this is the type of stuff that our great-grandchildren and our grandchildren and our children, even our children, are going to be reading about in history books. People are, right now, kids are reading about Trump getting elected in the history books. In 20, 25 years, this type of stuff, these diplomatic moments, this fracture in the Euro-Atlantic alliance that rug pulls the Ukrainians after he made commitments to them about atomic weapons and them giving them up and security guarantees, after some congressman even threatened to starve them out during their inflationary crisis post-Soviet collapse, the soft-handed approach post-2014 invasion, soft-handed approach towards the ceasefire violations, and then the 2022 invasion, we finally come a bit to our senses, and now we're back into our days. We're saying, how about we have another ceasefire with no security guarantees? Let's see if Minsk 3, third time's the charm. And so there's a certain naivete to this that is not going to be looked upon sympathetically by the people that follow us. They're going to be thinking, what were people thinking? And you know what a lot of the answer is going to be? Well, a lot of people didn't take Trump seriously. Well, a lot of people, that wasn't something people considered it at the ballot box, really. And, well, when Trump said that he, all these things about, the Ukrainians, people thought that the adults in the room would handle it. They just thought that, the people less powerful than the president, who had already shown himself to be very hard to control, would be controllable this time by people that are like Keith Kellogg and little Marco Rubio. These are not excuses that are going to be looked upon sympathetically. These are bad excuses. Bad excuses. And I don't think that in the future it's going to fly. And so I just want to boil down just how cruel this moment is, because this is probably the worst statement from Trump so far. And it might not sound like it when you first hear it, what we're going to break down today after we see all the rest of the recent kerfluffles. But what he is saying is probably the worst implication yet, even though it's what I feared and what I thought was likely. First off, I want to show you a post from Ambassador Bridget. This is the American ambassador to Ukraine. Let me read you the message. As of 4:55 a.m., Ukraine is under the threat from ballistic and caliber missile drones. And you can see here, this is the Ukraine alarm system. This is the system that many people, including myself, use. It's not just this. I also use Telegram channels because sometimes they'll usually be a little bit faster. But this is the system that most people use to see which regions of Ukraine are under missile and drone attack, to know like, hey, I need to go into the corridor right now. Or, hey, I need to at least, be aware that right now is not the safest moment, so I should be ready to take cover, Or in instances of some civilians, and I'm just saying some because I'm being honest, go down because right now there's, I don't know if it's 40% maybe go to a bunker. I think that might even be a bold prediction. Or you go to a bunker because, you're elderly or you have a child. You have somebody that you don't think you're comfortable with just going into the corridor. That's what the system's used for. And so she posts a picture of it and brings attention to this. And then she posts it in Ukrainian as well. And, I took this very bad. And I don't mean this as an insult to Ambassador Bridget A. Brink. She is in a very difficult position. And when I made a post about it, I think some people took it as, Dylan, don't take it out on the ambassador. I'm not trying to take it out on the ambassador. Bridget was appointed by the Biden administration. I have no reason to believe that she thinks that the recent statements from Keith Kellogg or the recent statements from Donald Trump or their policy is her policy. She's the ambassador with a president who probably would be almost 1,000,000%, like 99.9% certain would immediately kick her out if she showed any objection whatsoever to the Trump world MAGA policy towards Ukraine, outside of like slight praise with maybe a poke here, poke there, that she could somehow get in and out. I haven't seen any success into that. So I think that she is likely trying to bring attention to the brutality of the war, the fact that the Russians are not de-escalating, they're still bombing, Ukraine's still facing this threat, even with the aid cut off, but she doesn't, this is all she can do. Because that's really all she can do as ambassador to Kiev. So I don't want you to take it out on her, but I just want to say, from a Ukrainian perspective, from the perspective of the 98 to 99%, or the 99.5% of human beings that don't know that Ambassador Bridget A. Brink is friendly towards Ukraine, was appointed by the last administration, and she is just a suit. She is just a representative of the United States. So what everybody else sees is a representative of the country that not only just cut off all the aid that it had committed to Ukraine and already passed by Congress, stuff that's already in the Presidential Drawdown Authority, billions of dollars, stuff that was already in the pipe, and is also cutting off the commercial companies from supporting them, but is also cutting off the intelligence of the missiles that are coming into major cities, meaning that we will not warn them if a caliber missile is going to hit a civilian center or going to hit a major city. We're not going to give them that intelligence. And then you're Ukrainian. You just find out that this country that asked you to give up your atomic weapons, this country that committed to you, that will be with you as long as it takes, is now like, you know what? Because you're not conceding to the Russians, we're going to cut off all aid, and we're even going to tell our companies they can't even assist you. We're not even going to tell you when your major cities are going to be bombed. And then you open your phone and you see the ambassador say, hey, the Ukrainians are getting bombed. You know how this gets read? This gets read like America's rubbing their nose in it. That we won't even warn them when their cities are going to get bombed. And then we go on Twitter and say, hey, Ukraine's being bombed, guys. With no, like, this is why we should do this. This is why we should do that. Just like a reminder, everyone, Ukraine is being bombed. We're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to give them aid. We're not going to warn them. We're not even going to, we're actually, the things that we're going to do, like I just said, is actually going to be in the other direction. If anything, we're going to interfere with companies that are trying to provide services to the Ukrainians. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but the Trump administration recently pressured the Maxier Technology Group. Now, Maxier, I forget, basically they're a satellite company, and they provide commercial satellite photos to people for money. And you can pay them in order to, like, get a certain space grid of the Earth, a picture of it from one of their satellites once their satellites pass over that area. And so what a lot of people who work in OSCENT, like open source intelligence for Ukraine, you know, whether it's volunteer or not, they'll go to these companies, pay them some money, say, hey, I heard there might be some movement over here. Take a picture of this, this, and this. Get those pictures. Then they'll send them to the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian military, somebody. And I've seen people do this before. It's fascinating. Some of my friends do this all the time. We'll be watching pirated movies on one screen. We'll be watching anyway. But the thing is, when this is happening, this is like at some point, like, sorry, I got distracted. Somebody sent me a message. Threw me off. Anyway, this information can help units find out about, Russian troop buildups and entrenchments. It can help them find out about, Russian military action. And so these satellite companies had been working with, the Ukrainian government, and had been working with, these OSCENT people who had just been paying the money for this grid, that grid, in order to get information to the Ukrainian government so it can defend itself about what's happening on its territory. Now Trump has put its foot on the lever, put his foot on the lever. He's, leaned on the scale, and he's basically forced the company to say, we're not going to provide those services anymore. We're no longer going to provide satellite services for the Ukrainians as a private commercial company. This means this is at no cost to the Americans, zero cost to me and you. This is not a taxpayer-funded program. This is not an American government program. Now, giving them intelligence, warning them that their cities are going to be bombed is also at no cost to me and you. Maybe if we do certain jet flyovers over certain areas, certain intelligence gathering might come at a cost to you because, we have to pay for the fuel to have the jet go around there. But the vast majority of that intelligence gathering is at no cost to me and you. This is intelligence we have. This is stuff we probably were going to monitor anyway, definitely since Trump wants to know the state of the war because he wants to understand his negotiating position. Supposing that he actually cares to know his negotiating position. But I'm sure he's being updated about the war, regardless if he wants to know or not. So it's not that it's no cost, because no cost, it's still a provided service for the American government. So nothing that costs America money, because he doesn't want to cost him American taxpayer a dime. No services provided by the American government, because, the Ukrainians are just so ungrateful for our help and such, and, we need to add pressure to them. But now it's no private company at no cost to me and you, and without government resources, they can't even provide services to the Ukrainians. No government help, no zero cost help, and not even commercial help that the Ukrainians pay for. This is a pressure campaign by the Trump administration to try to get as many avenues that they can grab onto of support to Ukraine cut off in order to make them cave to their demands, and by extension, cave to Russian demands, undermining their negotiating position and probably making the Russians ask for more negotiations in the process, because Trump's priority is getting the war done and over with, wiping his hands of it. Whether it starts again in 3, 4, 5 years is not his immediate concern. He wants to get the war done with and normalize relations with the Russians. And today we actually saw some of the worst on this. I wanted to show you some of the worst on Trump. Number one, Donald Trump. I'm sorry, I want to get over to the statements, but I keep forgetting how much news we've missed in between then. Another thing that Donald Trump has done, before we get to his crazy statements, I can't believe it's so much in such a short time. I want to cover non-Ukraine news just to get my mind off of this, because this is honestly all very depressing. But and what other, I want to go to spend time on the recession, possible recession coming up. I want to spend time on Syria. Can I talk about like a scientific development? But there's so much I forget. I honestly forgot. You know what I forgot? I forgot that on top of everything we just talked about in relation to the war effort, the guy who said that he cares so much about the human lives, the guy who said he cares so much about protecting Ukrainian civilians, he also is looking towards kicking out 240,000 Ukrainian refugees living into the United States, deporting them back to Ukraine. Fast-track deportation. And you want to know why this got out there? This did not get out there because of an announcement from the Trump government, because he wanted to warn these refugees that hey guys, time to go. This came out because the press reported on it, because they were able to get a source. And this is in April. This is like a month away that this announcement is supposed to be announced. This announcement is supposed to be announced. It's a month away though. That's how much warning they got. And the reason they got that warning isn't even because of Trump or his administration. It's because the press just happened to get the story. This is cruel. This has nothing to do about the preservation of human life. It has nothing to do about Ukrainian civilians. This has nothing to do about human compassion or like, oh, I just want peace. If it was about human lives, then you wouldn't be saying, well, I want to protect human life from war, therefore let's deport 240,000 people to the war. And by the way, Trump's whole pitch about like we need to deport all, oh well, Dylan, it's migrants, Trump's a big deporter in chief. These are not violent Ukrainian gang criminals coming to the narrative he put out there is that there's migrants coming to America to eat your dogs, to eat your cats, bunch of racist nonsense. That wasn't true. And it wasn't true then, and it's certainly not true about the Ukrainians either. They've been basically model guests in our country. And this is what Trump had to say when a journalist came up to ask about the status of 20,000 Ukrainians who have TPS status in the United States and whether that was going to be revoked and they were going to be deported. And this was Trump's response.
TPS for the Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.
What about it?
Are you considering revoking the TPS status for the more than 200,000 Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.?
So I said 20,000 in the thing. I don't know why I said 20,000. It's supposed to be 200,000. Aaron Parr, you tripped me up.
What are you saying?
The Ukrainians that are here in the U.S., they're under a TPS status.
On GPS?
TPS,
I don't even know.
Oh, I thought you said GPS.
TPS.
Yeah.
There was some news saying that they were going to be revoked and they were going to be deported from the country. Are you considering that for the
Well, we're
Ukrainians?
not looking to hurt anybody, and we're certainly not looking to hurt them. And I'm looking at that, and there were some people that think that's appropriate and some people don't, and I'll be making a decision pretty soon. Okay?
There's some people who think it looks appropriate. There's some people who don't. They're 100% considering it. They're 100% considering it. I mean, the reports say that they're planning to announce it in April, but they're at the very least considering. I mean, listen to how he didn't reject it, so we know that they're either probably going to do it or Trump is very, at least openly, like considering it as like a threat to continue to build pressure. So you start by undercutting the Ukrainian war effort. You start by undercutting Ukraine's ability to defend itself and protect its civilians inside Ukraine. And then you build up pressure by taking the Ukrainian civilians you control and you have and sending them back to the war.
Squid has donated $25. Hey, Dylan Sky, here's a little treat for you. By the way, do you foresee any traveling problems between the US and Ukraine? Keep it up, Dylan.
It's just honestly my passport burnt in the fire, so I just got to get a new passport. That's my biggest problem. Thank you for the $25. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Dylansky. Dylansky. Okay. Moving on. I just can't. We care so much about the human life. Oh, it's all about peace. It's all about protecting lives. Now let's take all these civilians and force them back into the war zone because we care so much about human compassion and human life. Come on. Come on. You can't be falling for this. No one can be falling for this. But somehow they are. Somehow they are. Now, this is Trump on Putin. Now we're going to get into today's meeting, okay? Today's Oval Office meeting. Because today's Oval Office meeting was what I would call absolutely awful and bad. Now, that's no surprise, because every Oval Office meeting on this topic seems to be absolutely awful and bad, but today's was particularly bad. We're going to start with the not so bad, and we're going to end with the worst part, okay? Let's start with what Trump had to say about Putin and how well he's doing with the Russians.
President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, and Ukraine, I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. They don't have the cards. As you know, we're meeting in Saudi Arabia on sometime next week, early. And we're talking, I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that, can't do that.
Mr. President.
We're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done. Michael?
So the question from the journalist was, hey, the Russians are bombing Ukraine very severely right now. You know, they're killing civilians, they're bombing. The bombing campaign's very bad. They're not de-escalating that. Are you sure they really want peace? And he's like, yeah, they want peace. I'm sure they want peace. And then he just goes into this rant about how Russia has all the cards and Ukraine has none. He is negotiating. This is what I mean when I say he's negotiating on behalf of the Russians. He's saying Russia has all the leverage. Ukraine has no leverage. Russia gets everything. Ukraine gets nothing. That's what he's saying. He says they have all the cards. Ukraine has none. He is not reinforcing their position. He's not declaring that, you know, we're going to give you X, Y, and Z, which is going to reinforce you when the Russians violate X. There's no security guarantees. The closest we've gotten is, how about you give us your resources and that'll act as a security guarantee somehow, naively. I mean, he is negotiating against the Ukrainian position. He's undermining it, and he's undermining their security and undermining the negotiating position so he can give the Russians the best terms possible that would be satisfactory towards getting some sort of settlement as fast as possible, which means not reinforcing the Ukrainian position. And it would allow him not only to get this done quickly in his mind, at least in his mind, even though I think that this has a good chance of actually extending the war. It's hard to know exactly how it will go, but I do fear that. I fear that, you know, Russia, with the pressure removed off of them, will be able to continue this advance longer than with the pressure applied to them. But it's not just about ending it quickly. It's also about being able to normalize with the Russians. And if he doesn't give them a good enough deal that is satisfactory to them, or if they have like a ceasefire and, hey, you know, we're going to keep sanctions on you until you leave the rest of occupied Ukraine because we reinforce the territorial claims, then he can't do big business deal. He can't take a piece of paper and wave it around and say, hey, look, I'm the peace man. I did the peace. And not only did I do the peace, I did the big business deal. He cannot do his realignment without giving the Russians favorable terms that will, from their perspective, from the Russian perspective, not only allow Putin to, you know, reinforce his regime, but also reward those who supported the war effort and reinforce psychologically in Russia that the invasion was the correct move. These are side effects that I don't think are necessarily Trump's top priority, but I do think these are real life effects that it will have that'll be negative for Europe and negative for the United States, as much as Trump doesn't realize it. Next, you said on social media that Russia's pounding Ukraine. Why not provide Ukraine with air defense? This is the really bad one. I'm going to wait till the last one. I'm going to put that at the end because it really is it is awful what he says. So let's go with these ones first.
They don't know how to end the war. I think I do know how to end the war.
Also, about like Ukraine not having cards, I just want to quickly throw out there, because someone might say, Dylan, it's not whether Trump wants them to have cards or doesn't. They just don't. Why is the Black Sea Fleet sitting at the bottom of, well, the Black Sea? And it's not like they can reinforce that with new ships. The Turks would stop them. Why have they lost the majority of their tank arsenal? Why are they using, you know, Stalin-era tanks in combat? Late Stalin era, before, you know, he died in a puddle of his own piss. Why? Why do we have such old Russians, people in their 50s, signing up? I mean, that's like a normal age to be as a Russian volunteer, is 50 years old at this point to get those military contracts. Let's not pretend that Russia's under no pressure. We see the economic pressure they're under. And so when he said, oh, no cards, they don't have, it's not that they don't have cards. Ukraine still has cards. The only thing Trump is doing is taking cards off the table.
They don't know how to end the war. I think I do know how to end the war. And despite the Russia hoax, I've always had a good relationship with Putin. And, you know, he wants to end the war. He wants to end it. And I think he's going to be more generous than he has to be. And that's pretty good.
Putin's going to be more generous than he has to be. Remember that when we see the final deal. That whatever that deal is, in Trump's eyes, is more generous than Putin has to be. Remember that. Remember that.
That means a lot of good things. Because frankly, you could have made a great deal if this war never started. You could have made a great deal. I don't know that anything would have had to be given up. This was not a war that was going to start, Brian, and it didn't start for 4 years. You know, somebody said, "Well, how do we know that?" Well, for 4 years it didn't start. I used to speak to Vladimir about it. I used to speak to him about it at length. It was the apple of his eye, but there was no way he was going in, and he knew it. You know, there were going to be consequences, but.
By the way, don't you think it's interesting that on one hand, Trump will say things like, it's all about NATO, but then on the next hand, Trump will say, oh, I talked to him about it before he invaded, and he used to say that Ukraine was the apple of his eye, that he wanted it so bad. Wait, I thought it was all about NATO. If it was all about NATO, okay, you wouldn't just say like, oh, I kind of want this because I have to for security reasons, and then call it the apple of your eye. The apple of your eye means it's like, oh my God, this is the crown jewel of my empire. If I am to build my regime to be strong and my empire to be strong, we must take the the wheat jewel of the Russian. The apple of your eye implies it's, you know, if I was to say like, oh, that's the apple of my eye, or she was the apple of my eye, oh my God, I'm enthralled. Enthrallment is not something you would imply if it was just about NATO expansion. God, Trump himself, whether he knows it or not, contradicts just by what he lets slip his own narratives about the war.
It did start. I mean, think of.
This is dripping with naivete about trusting the Russians, or of course malicious, like I just don't care. Which you know what, it might be both. He might be that he maybe does trust Putin, and well, also if Putin screws over the Ukrainians, he doesn't care. It could be both at the same time, for all I know. Next statement. Now, this one is unrelated, but I thought this was funny because Trump technically said that he lost to the election.
Of 2020. They were all set to make a deal. And then when I lost, they saw this person who's a stupid person, very stupid person. And they said, let's not make a deal. And they were right.
By the way, that was not going to happen, okay? There's no report. Oh, my God. Peace was about to descend from the heaven. You see how... Oh, I was going to do a healthcare... Oh, concept of a plan. Oh, 24 hours. Oh, never mind. Oh, you know, there was a secret plan. Actually, we were going to bring peace to Ukraine, but then Biden won and it went up in smoke. And what was the plan called? Well, it goes to another school. Okay, now here is the statement from Trump. That is the thing that I stopped. I listened to it 3 or 4 times and my stomach sank. And this is something that I did think, but I didn't want to state outwardly because it's painful, and I wanted to make sure I had confirmation that this was what Trump was like. But I mean, it's just the reinforcement of his previous statements. You know, how do you fight terrorism? Bomb the families of terrorists, bomb civilians. That's how you add pressure. That's his version of pressure. And so when a reporter asked him, hey, you said that Russia's pounding Ukraine. Why not provide Ukraine with air defense? Trump's response was, because I have to know that they want to settle. We want them to settle. Listen.
With regards to the pause on military assistance to Ukraine, you put out on your social media post today that Russia is pounding Ukraine.
That's right.
Why not provide Ukraine with air defenses? And what happens, Mr. President, when Ukraine runs out of the Patriot missile batteries?
Good question. Because I have to know that they want to settle. I don't know that they want to settle. If they don't want to settle, we're out of there. Because we want them to settle. And I'm doing it to stop debt. More important than anything else. Secondarily, way down the line is the money. So we're in for $350 billion, and Europe is in for $100 billion. They should be in for the same or more than us. And, you know, I watched over the last week or so what's going on in Europe. This thing could end up in World War III if we don't get it settled. This could really end up in a World War III.
The world will blow up. The world will blow up if Ukraine doesn't surrender. The world will blow up if Ukraine doesn't surrender. Also, 350 cajillion, 470 bajillion, 17 quintillion. I mean, like, the number keeps increasing. Okay, it used to be 300 billion, which was still more like triple what it actually was. And now it's 350 billion. Next week, it'll be 400 billion. The week after that, it'll be 450 billion. Watch as he cuts off all aid and the number will still fucking increase. Watch. Watch. Now, look. The thing that really scares me about this, or what's really, really bad about this, besides the normal lies, besides the normal nonsense, the idea that the Ukrainians don't want to settle. And so, since they don't want to settle, you know, this is a way of adding pressure to make them want to settle. Because number one, he cares about the lives. And number two, secondarily, way, way, way down, according to Trump, the cost. And that's why we need to deport 240,000 Ukrainians to a war zone to protect lives. That's why we need to, stop sharing intelligence about missiles heading towards major civilians' locations and cities and schools and hospitals to save lives. That's why we need to stop sending air defense systems whose really only purpose is to intercept Russian caliber missiles that have hit children's cancer wards to save lives. To save lives. We need to negotiate an agreement without a security guarantee, meaning that it has a giant gaping hole of the Russians could just invade again at any point with no American deterrence to save lives as the first primary concern. And then way down the list, penny pinching. He is using the bombing of Ukrainian cities and the bombing of Ukrainian civilians and the cutting off of our support and the cutting off of the intelligence necessary and the system support necessary to make the weapons and support systems that we've given them, and in many instances they've even paid for, work. Like Starlink, which the Ukrainians have partially paid for. Now the French and other companies are trying to come in to replace intelligence here. They're trying to come in to replace different communication systems. But this isn't like, hey, we're withdrawing because it costs too much. This is, we're rug pulling you. This is the type of stuff that gets not only people on the battlefield killed, and this is what we've talked about before. For example, during the Battle of Avdiivka, there was a hold on aid to Ukraine because the Republicans wanted to pair immigration reform with aid to Ukraine because they're stupid. Now, you might say, how is that stupid? The reason it's stupid is because I heard this mandate from Mike Johnson and all these fiscally conservative Republicans about how we need to make sure that issues are separated. Yeah? That when you vote for one issue, it's a one-issue vote. And when you vote for this, it's a one-thing vote. You shouldn't have to vote for Ukraine aid to vote for immigration reform, right? You shouldn't have to vote for immigration reform to vote for Ukraine aid. You should just have a Ukraine bill brought to the floor and have a immigration bill brought to the floor and have them voted on their own things, right? But the problem was that they were never going to get the Democratic votes for immigration reform without taking Ukraine aid hostage. And so they did that for months. And then when they finally found a compromise after Avdiivka, was already feeling the pain from the ammunition shortage, as cities were starting to feel were feeling the pain from, you know, air defense shortages. Then they said, screw making a deal on this in the first place. It would be bad for the election. So never mind. And it was a 6-month hold for nothing that got people killed. And that should have told you everything you had to know about Trump and Ukraine policy. Now, some people, even some pro-Ukraine commentators, right? You don't want to say like names on the internet like Enforcer. So I'm not going to say Enforcer, and I'm not going to say the other people because that would be, you know, rude. So I won't say Enforcer. But there were people out there who were pretending that Trump could be better for Ukraine after seeing behavior like this. But it's like, but the way they were describing it to me sounded like they were playing roulette. Not that, like, oh, you know, there's a 50-50 chance, which is, they were calling about the Trump coin flip. It wasn't a Trump coin flip. You needed to roll a nat 20. And we got a 2. And we got a 2. Jazz Zogil, thank you so much for the 5 gifted Dylan Burns Live memberships. I appreciate that, buddy. Thank you. This right here is the direct use of Russian bombs to pressure the Ukrainians and rug pulling them
Burns
with no warning. And when I say no warning, then, you know, I know Keith Kellogg said there was a warning, but was the warning like, oh, we're going to tell commercial companies that they can't support you? Was the warning like, we won't even tell you when the missiles hit your hospitals? Was that the warning, or was the warning that, you know, maybe we'll cut off aid? Because Donald Trump is a spiteful person. And I don't find it hard to believe that originally it was going to be, well, maybe we'll cut some aid and then more aid and we'll escalate it slowly until they come to the table. And Trump just said, screw it, and did the whole rug pull. Where people already hesitant about cutting off the aid were, well, let's do it in a slow way. And then when Zelensky did not immediately cave, what did he do? What did he do? Rug pull. And it's going to get people killed. Not only soldiers, but civilians. When Trump says his main priority, again, is protecting civilian lives. Bullshit. Obvious bullshit. But that's what he just said. And yet, for him, main priority, protect civilian lives. Let's take all the refugees, put them in the war zone, and then give the government no means to protect them. To protect lives. To protect lives. This is the thing, right? This is the thing. To me, it'd be easier if it was just, I don't care, we're cutting off aid and we're leaving, right? And it was just, we're just isolationists. It's not that. He's adding pressure to them to concede to the Russian terms, because it can't just be that Trump doesn't care and they leave. It has to be Trump's the hero. It has to be Trump's the peace man, Trump's the savior, and it has to be an easy avenue towards normalization with the Russians. And so that's how you're getting this type of behavior. Because if it was just like if it was like Chase Oliver, like some, I don't know, principled, like isolationist style libertarian, it would be a slow pulling out, I'd imagine. Like where you're slowly decreasing the aid support so they could find alternatives. I would imagine to be some compassion in the way that the plug was pulled, right? This is not the pulling of the plug. This is, he's taking the pillow and he's putting it over the face of U.S. aid and shanking them to make sure you get some in the guts at the same time. This is all done as painfully as possible, and that's the point. And the people that I was told by both those in Ukraine who wanted to flip the coin on Trump and those in the pro-Ukraine sphere who thought it was a good idea, and from those on election night who were telling me, Dylan, don't worry, Trump will have the advisors with him this time and they'll take the whole. They'll take lead on this. These are the people that will, you know, make sure Trump corrects course. Listen to what Keith Kellogg, Trump's peace envoy to Ukraine, had to say about the cutoff of aid and intelligence, and now the pressuring of private companies not to support Ukraine either. It's like hitting a mule in the face with a 2x4, you know? You got their attention. Deporting 240,000 refugees back to a war zone. Cutting off the air defense systems that will get people killed. Cutting off the intelligence support that costs us nothing but saves lives. And I quote, it's like hitting a mule in the face with a 2x4. In this scenario, Ukraine is the barnyard animal that needs to be beaten into submission by the American government. This is dehumanization, by the way, right? I mean, if like Trump sycophants are like saying they're sacrificing babies to fund the war and they're constantly lying about it, right? And we're seeing like the Republican view of Ukraine continue to sink and sink and sink, not only due to the just blatant nonsense that's being pumped out there by the alt media conservative sphere, but also by what's being spouted out for the president of the United States. And now his pro-Ukraine advisors. You know, this guy was meeting with wounded veterans like 3 weeks ago, and now he's describing Ukraine as a barnyard animal that needs to be beaten into submission. This was the person who was supposed to be the pro-Ukraine voice in the Trump administration. Now, I saw when I said this on Twitter, somebody said, Dylan, that was your fault for believing. I never believed that it would be enough. It was a hope that I had, because hope is indomitable, is unconquerable, and the human spirit grasps onto it no matter how much you wish it wouldn't, so you didn't let yourself down, but you do it anyway because you have no choice. But I didn't think he was going to get in there and really change the president's mind. I thought maybe he'd push him a little bit in one way, a little bit the other way, do his best to make sure the president doesn't get his pockets snatched. I didn't think he'd go out there, describe Ukraine as a barnyard animal, and say they have to be beaten into submission, and the way that you beat them into submission is by dropping all those support mechanisms and pressuring support mechanisms that intercepts Russian missiles as they hit Ukrainian cities. This is the use of Russian bombs to pressure the Ukrainian government by the American government. You know, there's a rumor that's been going around, and I heard it on the grapevine yesterday, but then I saw it reported today by like a few outlets. Nothing, I don't think anything super credible. Who knows if it's true or not? I think it's just rumor as of right now. And that's all you should treat it as, just blatant rumor. But the rumor is that as we're cutting off all this intelligence assistance, and as we're cutting off all this, satellite assistance and pressuring these commercial companies, we're taking coordinates of Ukrainian ammunition storage facilities and such, and we're giving it to the Russians for them to blow up. Now, we don't have any evidence of this, no proof of this. This is the rumor that's going around. Now, I don't really put any weight into it. I would also say that I can't 100% discount the possibility with the current admin, considering how he views pressure and war. But whether or not it's true, probably not. It'd be crazy if it was. This just kind of shows how Ukrainians are viewing the United States right now. They're viewing us as a traitorous nation, as a betrayer, as a den of snakes that will backstab you and leave you to die because you heard something silly about their country on a fucking podcast, and then you decided to elect the moron in chief who is more than willing to sell them up creek to the Russians. So to them, this rumor, whether it's true or not, this is the vibe that's spreading, that the United States is the betrayer, and now all they can do is hope that Europe will come to their aid and that they've been shaken by this final betrayal. And as we hear these $800 billion announcements, we're hoping that that's the case, but we don't know. Either way, though, this is not how you win hearts and minds, and this is not how you undercut the Ukrainian government perspective, the Ukrainian government position. In fact, I want to throw something at you. Here's Zelensky's polling data. It's jumped. Zelensky's approval ratings jumped to 68% after Trump clash, poll shows. President Volodymyr Zelensky's approval rating has risen to 68%. This is the highest it's been in a while, following the heated exchange with U.S. President Donald Trump, according to a poll by the Kiev International Institute of Sociology, published by March 7th. Now, there's other polling data that suggests that, Zelensky's quite popular. Not this popular. This is the highest data we've seen recent. It's also the most recent data. But this was disputed by Musk because the Kiev Institute from Sociology took U.S. aid money, and U.S. aid is an evil money laundering cartel, like fucking demonic organization. Therefore, it's all fake. But you can go look at their, you can look at the way that they do these polls. Their methodology is just, you can go check it out, right? You don't need to make up some crazy conspiracy theory. It's just that he doesn't want to accept the fact that Zelensky is more popular than he thinks. And so when, Elon Musk or others around him say stuff like, oh, Zelensky would lose an election, that's why he doesn't host one, they just don't know what they're talking about. And it's not that it's impossible for him to lose an election, it's just that he's not gonna, Zelensky doesn't want him to run an election right now. He's literally saying, I'm with Zelensky right now, basically, through his pictures he's taking. He's not indicating that we need to have a race right now. So the idea that there's this big public pressure on Zelensky to have an election right now amongst Ukrainian society, that just doesn't exist. But he doesn't want to go to Ukraine. It intercepts with his beliefs about the country. And so that's how we get this idea that Zelensky is terribly unpopular and he's got the country on a stranglehold, even though the polling data indicates that he's quite popular and the numbers going up since this kerfuffle with Trump is having the opposite effect than what they wanted. Before the diplomatic spat, a February 2025 survey showed that 57% of Ukrainians trusted Zelensky, while 37% did not, resulting in a trust-distrust balance of 20%. Between February 14th and March 4th, trust in Zelensky increased to 68%, with the share of those who do not trust him dropping to 29%, improving his net approval rating to plus 38%. Tech billionaire Elon Musk, a close ally of Trump, took to X on March 6th, the day before this poll was released, to claim if Ukraine were to hold an election, Zelensky would lose by a landslide. Not that he would just lose by a little bit, he would lose by a landslide. This is a man who lives on Twitter and needs to live in the real world. And somehow he's advising the president of the United States. Now look, I want to throw out there though, that there are people in Trump world, or at least not Trump world, but people who support Trump, want the administration to do well, who see the writing on the wall, what this is going to mean long term. Because I do not believe that a betrayal of Ukraine is going to help Trump. I do not believe a betrayal of Ukraine is going to help the United States. And I think that if we leave them up creek and the Ukrainians start suffering on the front line, it's going to reflect poorly on Trump. Now, I want to read this post from Sean Fitzgerald. He's also known as Actual Justice Warrior, AJW, which he prefers to be called all the time. He doesn't like being called Sean Fitzgerald. He only likes to be called Actual Justice Warrior. Be sure to call him that. I'm going to make him despise me. If the Europeans pay for the weapons, that's fine. But intelligence can't be replaced by Europe. We have the satellite coverage the Europeans don't. A major foreign policy blunder could tank Trump's whole term. A major Russian advance during an intelligence blackout equals disaster. And then somebody else responded saying, it's only offensive intelligence from what I understand. No, that was Defense Secretary announcing last week a pause on offensive cyber warfare meant to counter Russia, which is already in its own sense a separate bad thing. That included a pause on activities unrelated to Ukraine. Okay, so Sean understands the same way that I think I understand that if this was to happen, it would not reflect well on Trump. Outside of the implications about, oh my God, now our NATO allies are at risk, or oh my God, Russia, an American enemy who has been, and when I say American enemy, I mean this is a country that wants disunity in the United States. And this is a country that tries to get Black Lives Matter protesters, and pro-police protesters to fight. They do that purposely because they want us fighting each other. They want us as divided as possible because they want us retracting from the world stage, inward, fighting ourselves so that they can claim more empire in places where we have allies and alliances and where they believe it's their sphere of influence. Like, for example, Eastern Europe, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Moldova, these countries, former, we can call them former Soviet sphere, former Russian Empire, whatever you want to call them. These countries, of course, don't prefer that terminology, but the Russians sure do. And if they pursue this goal that they've been pretty openly admitting to for a while, at least when it comes to the people around Putin and the way Putin talks about the civilizational battle with the West and the reclamation of Russian empire, how Russia can only exist as an empire, and how the logic of the Russian-speaking logic that applied to Ukraine could easily extend to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, and tons of other countries. And so if he just pulls out all support, including support that costs them nothing, and the Ukrainians actually suffer because of that, and the press comes out and say, look, Ukraine was holding up for 3 years. 3 years they were holding up. You know, it might have not been great, this war. It might have been awful. But Zaporizhia was not in range. Kramatorsk was still being defended. Kharkiv was not in range like this. Oh my gosh, look at them advancing, huge advances. And there might be some polling data that the Trump administration and others are reading that says, hey, 50% of Americans want a quick end to the war, while 50% want to continue. So we got like half and half, guys. And I saw that like data that people are trying to cite to be like, hey, look, this is actually all fine. Americans, you're implying what that means. You're implying what that means. The vast majority of Americans wanted to leave Afghanistan, right? Nobody wanted to see Afghans falling from helicopters as bombs go off, killing not only American troops, 13 American soldiers, but also hundreds of civilians as we see all of our allies getting executed across. Nobody wanted that. I mean, tons were evacuated, but a lot was a mess. And if you don't think a Russian advance across the Ukrainian countryside is going to come with more POW executions, more hunting of civilians, Google Human Safari. I'm going to be releasing a documentary about it in the near future, but just Google it. It's going to look horrible. On top of the negative security implications of a nation state that is openly wanting the undermining of the United States and our political structures and our unity, but is also pursuing it openly with open sabotage, industrial, and commercial. Like, for example, the arson attacks in Canada, or the attempted derailments in Poland, or the attempted... Point is, it's not going to look good on the cameras. These cities getting bombed, Russia advancing, Trump looking weak after this peace through strength proclaimment, while he was saying he was going to end the war in 24 hours, it's 8 months later, and Kharkiv's in range. Not only did he not end the war in 24 hours, the country that's the obvious sympathetic victim is the one that's getting brutalized after he said, fuck this, and pulled the rug. People wanted him to negotiate a quick end to the war that could mean it's an end to the war, meaning an end that both sides could probably like continue and survive with, and Ukraine gets to retain a just enough foundation that it doesn't feel the need to restart another. That's what people wanted in vague terms, something around those lines. They did not want the United States to just tell the Ukrainians surrender and just give the Russians everything they want. They did not want the United States to say, screw this, pull the rug, and walk away, especially if Trump's trying to emphasize the biggest concern is civilian lives. So this is not what they wanted. And so this could be a big blunder. And people could say, oh, it's foreign policy. How much do people care about Ukraine? I mean, the Afghanistan withdrawal was Biden's first big foreign policy hit. And it was the beginning of the end of his polling numbers. And Donald Trump already has historically low polling numbers for a president in the first few weeks of his term. He's like 50-50. Some polls have him up a few points. Some polls have him down a few points. But he's dead even. That is historically low for the honeymoon period of the president of the United States. He's already got enough problems with the economy. He's already got enough problems when it comes to Doge or any type of government mismanagement that's going to come with the chaos of a lot of these cuts. He's already got enough problems in a million different areas. Why create a foreign policy problem here when continued support for the Ukrainians can come at little to, I mean, when it comes to intelligence support, no cost to you. The sanctions come at very little cost to the United States. There's not a lot of business opportunities that American companies are chomping at the bit to get in there. And so I think Sean and some other people kind of see that. But Sean is not advising the President of the United States. I wanted to throw out there one more thing, right? One more thing as to the security arrangements. This is a post from Zelensky last night. No, not last night, this morning, technically, from where I'm at. But over there was, he's talking about last night. And it's talking about massive attacks on civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure to undercut electricity. The United States has stopped supporting Ukrainian electrical infrastructure with its aid packages, which means the blackouts are probably going to be more frequent. And, I mean, I remember seeing the rolling blackouts when I was there. It's probably going to get worse. And he's talking about this brutality. He's talking about the attacks on their civilians. And this is what the war is for Ukrainians. It's this and this, day in, day out. And if you wanted to be done with this, let me ask you a question. If you wanted to be done with this, would it be better to continue fighting, continuing to suffer this for now, even if it gets worse, or pass it down to your kids in 5 to 6 years without security guarantees? Because if that's not how you see the equation, That's how many Ukrainians are looking at the equation right now. You're giving them no good option, which makes Trump not look like the peacemaker in chief. He just looks like the person who fucked over Ukraine. Security guarantees are necessary for any long-lasting peace. Without them, what you're relying on is the Russians' word. And even if you say, well, Putin will die in 6-7 years, and I have this conversation, well, Putin will die in 6-7 years, so then the ambitions for Ukraine will die. That's naive. It's naive to think that Russian chauvinism lives and dies with Putin. And it's naive to think that he's the only person who wanted this war in the first place. I wanted to show you this piece of paper right here, though. Because I think sometimes when we talk about, like, Russia violates security arrangement, we've beaten Ukraine half to death. They violated the Budapest Memorandum. They violated basing agreements. They violated basically every single form of treaty, dozens of treaties in reference to Ukraine, and on top of ceasefires over and over and over again. And so I don't want to rehash that. I wanted to show something else. Does anybody in chat know what this is? Come on, somebody has to know. I would give that person extreme credit if they knew what this was. Yeah, there must be an Estonian in here. Somebody? I'll even let Gutter chat or Twitch chat answer. There it is. There we go. Tartu peace agreement. This is a peace agreement signed in 1920, February 2nd of 1920, between the Estonians and the Russians. February 2nd, 1920. Of course, we're talking about Soviet times. Let me read you some text from this. So this is the Tartu Peace Treaty between Estonia and Russia, dated on here, February 2nd, 1920, signed by a number of representatives from both the Soviet forces and the Estonians. On February 2nd, 1920, according to which Russia renounced voluntarily, and I quote, forever all rights of sovereignty formerly held by Russia over the Estonian people and territory. Let me read that again. Forever all rights of sovereignty formerly held by Russia over the Estonian people and territory. Now, if you guys know World War II history, you would know that within 20-25 years of this, the Russians would be reoccupying Estonia, violating this agreement, and conquering it under Stalin. A different leader than the people that were actually signing this agreement, even if Stalin was involved in Soviet politics at the time. There was an interest in conquering Estonia before. There was then by the Russians, even as a Soviet communist entity, just like there was an interest in the Russian Empire before of having that land. They then shifted to Stalin, new leadership, violates agreement, comes back in. I'm not saying that like this trend of making agreements and violating agreements is unique. The United States has done this to native peoples many times. What I'm saying is that to base your trust in Putin as the foundation for a ceasefire and then a peace deal, with the only security arrangement being the extraction of Ukrainian resources, is not only naivete, it is historical illiteracy to the point of maliciousness. And so you got two options. He's either getting his pocket snatched, or he's snatching pockets with the Russians.